Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed Director General Lydia Brito, dear Deputy High Commissioner Nada Al-Nashif, esteemed Director of UN Habitat Anna Claudia Rosbach, Director of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe, Claudia Luciani, esteemed Secretary General of the International Union of Cities, Ms. Emilia Seitz, esteemed State Secretary Schellhorn, Deputy Governor Kohm, dear Mayor of Graz, Elke Kahr, dear Professor Martha Davis and Daphne Feinholz, esteemed Professor Alison Hosey, and dear Rector Peter Friedler.
Respected Excellencies, Secretary of State, Governor, Mayor, and Rector, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests worldwide.
A warm welcome to the 5th conference, Human Rights Go Local. Over the past 3 days, 100 experts have engaged in discussions on how responsibility for human rights in cities can be strengthened through budgetary measures. Today, we are holding the high-level closing conference, and we are very pleased to present the outcome document and publish it together with
Klaus Stahl, Director of the UNESCO Category 2 Center for the Promotion of Human Rights at the local and regional levels.
And Karin Schmidt-Lechner, Professor of Contemporary History and long-standing member of the Center,
will guide you through the coming 2 hours and may ask our host rector, Peter Riedler, for his welcoming words.
Dear colleagues, dear participants, I would like to warmly welcome you to the conference Human Rights Go Local, What Works. Human rights are not an abstract ideal. They are the foundation of how we live together as a society. We live in a time in which the achievements of recent decades are coming under pressure. Reports from international organizations show just how strained the human rights situation has become in many places. This does not affect individual regions alone. It affects the stability and credibility of an international order based on law, protection, and responsibility. These developments do not stop at Europe's borders. Europe, which has historically understood itself as a community of values, must demonstrate that human rights are not merely an aspiration, but a lived reality. At the same time, Europe bears a particular responsibility worldwide. And that is exactly where your conference comes in. Human rights should be felt where they shape everyday life, at the local level. After all, municipalities and cities make decisions every day about access to education, housing, healthcare, mobility, or social support. One particularly effective tool is human rights-based budgeting. Budgets are not merely numbers, they represent political priorities. At the University of Graz, we have been actively shaping this debate for years, among other things, through the European Training and Research Center for Human Rights and Democracy, as well as through the UNESCO Chair in Human Rights and Human Security, which has been anchored at our university since 2016. Both stand for research, teaching, and dialogue with practitioners. I wish you an inspiring exchange, productive workshops, and the courage to take the next step towards the lasting institutionalization of human rights-based budgeting. Your concluding document, which will be presented to high-level political decision makers, will undoubtedly send a strong signal. Thank you very much for your commitment. I wish you an inspiring conference.
Thank you very much for your introductory words, Director. Now it's my great pleasure to ask the Deputy Governor of Styria, Manuela Kohm, for our welcoming words. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights are not just abstract concepts. They are effective in all areas of everyday life, especially in our daily interactions with each other. They decide whether participation is successful, whether justice is served, and whether nobody is left behind. And with this in mind, politics must also adhere to human rights and embrace them at all levels, from the community to the European level. And this starts with establishing a budget. Today, at this conference, we are focusing on human rights-based budgeting. which involves more than just managing public funds correctly. It's about using them in a targeted manner to improve people's everyday lives, because every decision that you take at the budget level is also a human rights decision. At the municipal level, in particular, it is important to align budget policy according to what the people need, especially these people who need special support. Effective budgeting also means learning. It means adapting, adjusting, and developing the budget system further. And this should be done through dialogue between politics, the administration, and the civil society. I'm very happy that this conference enables this kind of exchange. I wish you an inspiring conference and many valuable insights.
Our next guest is Secretary of State, Mr. Josef Schellhorn, representing the Republic of Austria. Mr. Schellhorn, you have the floor for your welcome address.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, it is my deepest pleasure to send you my greetings to you today and to the UNESCO Center of Human Rights in Graz. Even though I may not be able to be with you in person, I was keen to speak to you directly. The topics at hand are too important not to address. Human rights must be protected and promoted at all levels of governance. They do neither begin or no end with international declarations or national legislation. They become reality in people's lives. This is why regions and cities play such an important role. They translate human rights from policy into practice, in education, in equal opportunities, in access and non-discrimination in everyday life. Locality is where all these are rooted. Austria pursues a clear multi-level approach. We always have. It's a part of our DNA. The federal level provides the legal frameworks of national action plans and international commitments. Gender equality is another powerful example of how this cooperation works in practice across federal, regional, and local levels. Our shared objectives remains clear as ever. We must protect human rights not only on paper, but every day, everywhere. Our society stands on this principle, or it shan't stand at all. I wish you a successful discussion and thank you very much for your important work.
Thank you very much, Mr. State Secretary, for your welcoming words. And now it's my great pleasure to announce Ms. Claudia Rosbach, Director of the United Nations Human Settlements Program, Human Habitat. The floor is yours.
Excellency, dear colleagues, partners, and friends, I am pleased to welcome you to the 5th Academy and Conference on Human Rights. Go Local, What Works. UN Habitat has been a long-standing and proud partner of the Academy and Conference, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank our organizers and friends, especially the International Center for the Promotion of Human Rights at the local and regional levels under the auspices of UNESCO. Now, more than ever, we must stand together for human rights. And that is exactly what makes this conference so important. By bringing together local authorities, human rights specialists, urban professionals, and importantly, our next generation to discuss what works, we create a shared platform for solutions that can be scaled and adapted. While a state responsibility, human rights start at the local level. It is the cities and the local authorities that are often the first point of contact for rights holders. It is at a local level that services are delivered that promote, protect, and fulfill human rights for all. Localizing human rights is therefore a key priority for UN Habitat. In UN Habitat's experience, human rights-based budgeting is an important tool for this. With structured guarantees, it serves to empower the full diversity of people in communities, including those most at risk of being left behind. It emphasizes community leadership, transparency, and accountability, while also being cost-effective and committing resources to where they are most needed. In our work, especially in the context of participatory Islam upgrading, as a result of human rights-based budgeting, we have not only witnessed the empowerment of women and young people, but also the improvement of the service delivery, including in informal settlements. Effective access to financial decision-making that leaves no one behind has strengthened trust between the people and local authorities, which is essential for human rights-based urban development. The local and the global are indeed intrinsically connected. By localizing human rights, we localize our global and national commitments to the dignity of all humans. At the same time, localizing human rights is also essential to accelerate the achievement of our global commitments. From the Sustainable Development Goals to the New Urban Agenda, ensuring that these frameworks are not abstract promises, but lived realities for all. I would have loved to join you in person today, but I very much hope to see you all in Baku in May this year for the 13th session of the World Urban Forum, where the localization of human rights and the Sustainable Development Goals will also inform all of our conversations. See you there.
Thank you, Mrs. Grossbach. Being a UNESCO Category 2 center, it is our particular honor to welcome Mrs. Lydia Brito, Assistant Director General of UNESCO in Paris. Mrs. Brito, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to open this high-level conference on local governments and human rights-based budgeting, pathways to accountability. Let me begin by recognizing the International Center for Promotion of Human Rights at the local and regional levels in Graz. Since becoming a UNESCO Category 2 center in 2019, it has become a global reference for advancing human rights where they matter most, at the local level. This conference reminds us of a simple but a powerful truth. Human rights are realized or denied through public choices. Among the most decisive of these choices are budgets. Far from neutral technical tools, budgets shape priorities, allocate resources, and give concrete meaning to human rights obligation. A human rights-based approach to budgeting moves us from commitments to accountability. By integrating principles such as participation, no discrimination, transparency, and accountability throughout the budget cycle, financial decisions can be assessed not only for efficiency, but for their real impact on people's life. Local governments are central to this transformation. As the level of governance closest to communities, they shape access to essential services and play a critical role in addressing inequalities. Human rights-based budgeting provide them with a practical framework to align financial decisions with human rights standards and reach those furthest behind. UNESCO has long supported cities in this work, notably through Kahr and the Global Alliance Against Racism and Discrimination, in which the Graz Center plays a key role. This conference offers an important space to deepen cooperation and ensure that budgets become true instruments of accountability and human rights for all. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Director Brito, for your nice words.
Considering the dramatic increase of victims of state violence in the last time, we would like to commemorate them by a minute of silence.
Thank you very much. It is a special honor for me to welcome the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Nada Al-Nashif, to the conference. The Office of the High Commissioner has launched the Human Rights Economy Program, which Nada Al-Nashif will introduce in her keynote speech to the esteemed participants of this conference. May I ask you for your keynote address, High Commissioner?
Your Excellencies, honorable mayors and local leaders, distinguished participants, it's a real pleasure to close the 5th Academy, Human Rights Go Local, What Works, and to open this high-level conference on local governments and human rights-based budgeting with such outstanding speakers. You've already heard, I'm sure, many times, more than half of the world's population now lives in cities, and that number we know is rising, and it's putting local governments in particular under immense pressure. And just to recap the context a little, we know that up to 3 billion people face a housing affordability crisis. Over 1 billion live in informal settlements without access to basic services. Environmental degradation, inequality, poverty, and rapid technological change are deepening these pressures. Nearly half of the SDG targets are off track, and progress is actually reversing on almost 1 in 5. These challenges are not abstract. They are felt very tangibly in overcrowded classrooms, in inadequate housing, overstretched clinics, and unequal access to services. They are experienced locally, and they demand local, accountable, inclusive, and human rights-based responses. States' human rights obligations apply at all levels of government, and it is at the local level, that closest to people, that these rights are most often delivered or denied: housing, education, healthcare, water, sanitation, and social protection. And that brings us to human rights-based budgeting. Budgets are among the most powerful tools that governments have, and they are not neutral. Every budget tells a story about priorities, about whose needs come first, about which inequalities are mitigated, and which gaps remain. Human rights budgeting helps to ensure that budget processes are transparent, they are participatory and accountable, that allocations are aligned with human rights obligations, and that spending is assessed for its real impact on people's rights. With this in mind, our office has supported governments on human rights-based budgeting in many contexts. Our experiences show that with commitment, positive results are indeed possible. We have provided national-level capacity building in Chile, Ghana, Kyrgyzstan, the Republic of the Congo, Somalia, the Gambia, and Uzbekistan. Such support typically includes targeted trainings and workshops on human rights-based budgeting for economic, social, and cultural rights, as well as on the collection and use of disaggregated budgetary data. Also, assistance to states to strengthen domestic revenue mobilization and promote more equitable and rights-consistent tax and expenditure policies. And finally, support for the meaningful participation of rights holders, including groups that are disadvantaged, marginalized, in order to set priorities for local budget processes. In 2023 in Kenya, our work showed that the lack of comprehensive and accessible fiscal information limits public engagement in the budget-making process at all levels of governance. The office's work also aims to ensure that rights holders are seen and heard within country-level budget processes through training initiatives, usually in collaboration with local organizations and county government officials. Similarly, in 2021 in Ukraine, in the context of social protection budgeting at the local level, our work identified gaps in needs assessment, in gender-sensitive indicators, and targeted monitoring that was limiting the effectiveness of local authorities to address the rights of persons in vulnerable situations and to ensure accountability for the results. Our engagement there focused on strengthening evidence, indicators, and monitoring. These experiences show that if progress is possible, however, it is definitely not automatic. Addressing such gaps requires the strengthening of institutional capacities, the empowering of staff, leadership, and public officials with knowledge and skills that are necessary to align such decisions and decision-making with human rights. Sharing promising practices is critical if we are to improve decision-making, if we are to strengthen the accountability, and also, very importantly, to build trust between local governments and the communities that they serve. Tools such as the guidance framework for creating a human rights city that was developed with United Cities and local governments, and also the outcome document of this academy, offer very practical pathways for embedding human rights into local budgeting and governance. Civil society, academia, grassroots organizations, and human rights defenders, of course, also play a vital role through social audits, through expenditure tracking, and through budget analysis. Ultimately, it is the concrete choices that local governments make, how resources are allocated, which services are prioritized, who is included in the decision-making. All of these determine whether human rights are realized or denied. So let me conclude with a call, first to local governments. Please use your budgets to shape the future of your communities with decisions that embody commitments to dignity, to equality, and to social justice, turning human rights into a lived reality for the people that you serve. To civil society, academia, communities, and human rights defenders, your voices are essential to securing responsive budgets that leave no one behind. Principles can become practice. Let us make human rights-based budgeting the norm, not the exception, so that cities and communities become places where rights are lived, trust is built, and hope is renewed. Thank you, and good luck with the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy High Commissioner Nada Al-Nashif.
Now it is my pleasure to hand over to Martha Davis, Professor of Law at the School of Law, Northeastern University, Boston. Her particular expertise is grounded in her co-editorship of the book Human Rights, Economies, and Subnational Governance. She is now going to moderate the panel encouraging local governments to human rights-based budgeting, pathways to accountability. Good morning to Boston, dear Martha. Thank you for being up so early. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So we have a distinguished panel this morning, and I guess I'll go ahead and just introduce them. Is that what you'd like me to do? So we're in order. We'll hear from Elke Kahr, the Mayoress of Graz, then Alison Hosey, who's with the Scottish Human Rights Commission, a research officer there, Secretary General Emilia Saiz, the Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Governments, Claudia Luciani, Director of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, Dr. Savitri Bisnath, who is co-editor with me of the book that was mentioned earlier. And then Daphne Feinholz, the Director of Research, Ethics, and Inclusion at UNESCO. So we'll go ahead and start off here with a question for the Mayor of Graz. For such a privilege to moderate this panel with such distinguished participants and to cap off this really excellent discussion that we've had. So is Mayor Kahr there? My question to you is, what would you, and you're, very great, hi, very, amazing honor to be the recipient of the World Mayor Award for 2024. So, in that capacity, as an internationally recognized mayor, how would you recommend that your colleagues around the globe consider the outcome document that we've heard about? How should they consider that to help their cities in efforts to deliver human rights to residents? What's your recommendation?
Well, I wish you all a wonderful day and good morning. It's a great honor for me to be here at this conference and to take part in this panel discussion. Compared to the global scale, Graz is a small city. We have 308,000 inhabitants. We're the second biggest city in Austria, and it's a great honor for me to, as a mayor of such a small city, to say a few words. The city of Graz is a human rights city. This is a grand title that we have, and it was bestowed upon us or awarded to us many years ago. And it was due to the efforts of previous governments. And of course, if you bear this title, you also bear a lot of responsibility. And everybody who knows me knows I've been in the political scene for 40 years now. Everybody who knows me also knows that I don't believe in empty words. Studies are important, but ultimately it is important to translate these words into concrete political action. Only then will you be able to live up to the title and to these ambitious objectives. And it was mentioned earlier, and it was said very correctly, namely, what is important. It's about the individual people, the individual person. Everyone living in our city or in any city needs to have access to the same political rights, but also share the same political responsibilities, regardless of their origin. I am not only convinced of that as a mayor of a city, but also as a politician and member of a party for a very long time. And this is also the reason why I decided to become politically active at a very early age. You have to understand there is always a top and a bottom, that social and fair distribution of means is important. Anything, everything that people need, be it education in schools, be it health, be it public welfare, be it energy supply, whether it's heat or light or accommodation, all of this needs to be fairly distributed, and I'm convinced of that. It must be in the hands of public authorities. It should not be private companies that decide these things. Only if all of these services are in the public realm can I assure fairness and justice. And also with regard to the costs. It is important that all of these services are also rendered to those who are less well off, to the vulnerable members of our society. So if you ask me for my recommendations, well, this is the reason why I have been politically active for various decades. I stand for social matters. In my career, I was also in charge of housing, and I was always defending all the things that I mentioned earlier. And now I'm very happy and proud to have the privilege to be a mayor in a city where I have the possibility to implement all of this. Let me say a few words on the example of housing. Of course, the market can control and regulate a lot, but not everything. In order to have a nice home, an affordable home, means that we need to have a large number of flats in the public, under public management. And this is not only social housing, it is also housing where people can define prices that are affordable for everyone, also for earners of in the middle income brackets, to make sure that nobody is left behind, also with regard to housing. So no matter whether it's members of third states or everyone needs to have just access and fair access to this type of housing. And in the past years, we have made great progress here. We have 12,000 flats in social housing, and the only condition for people who apply for this housing is that they must have been registered in the city of Graz for 1 year. So they must have had their primary place of residence in Graz for 1 year. And nobody should be excluded, no nations, no nationality. And this applies to other areas as well. For example, we have a support fund in the city of Graz. If people who are in employment suddenly face an emergency, they can draw on the funds of this emergency fund. And in all the districts of the city of Graz, we have support services and make sure that everyone living in the various districts of Graz get access to these services. And people who are homeless or who come from other countries and have not yet lived here for 1 year and therefore do not have access to all the rights. So we have signed this document that makes sure that they also have access to housing. We have various initiatives reaching from the design of homes that make it possible for us to offer housing also to people without any income. And recently we established a daycare center for people who live on the streets to make sure that they have a place where they can do their laundry, where they can have a warm meal, where they can rest for an hour or more. In summer time, it is very hot in Graz, so this center offers cool rooms. And this is also a place where these people can talk to others and where they will receive support and advice and counseling. So we have followed the motto, don't forget anyone, which is similar to don't leave anybody behind. And everyone in Graz is ready to follow this motto. It is our task to strengthen the approach. Let me give you another example. We have a communal kitchen that is able to supply 35 or provide 35,000 meals per day to make sure that there are warm meals supplied to institutions and also to families who are no longer able to pay for their daily meal. So these are just a few examples. I believe it does not make sense to say even more because otherwise I would be too long.
Well, thank you so much, and it's really great to two things I'll point out. One thing, it's great to hear that you got active politically at such apparently a very young age and have really followed through and been able to implement some of your vision, which is fantastic. And then to hear very concretely about some of the things that Graz is doing to really bring human rights home to the people of the city. So thank you so much for that. We are going to circle back now to Marcus Mostel. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that inadequately, to hear about the outcome document that is sort of provides the overview of what's come out of the conference, and then we'll come back to our panelists. So, Marcus, let me hand it back to you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, mayors, and distinguished colleagues, where in your city's budget can I find the right to health or the right to education? I'm not asking for the theory. I'm not asking for the declarations that we've made. I'm asking, where does it appear in the numbers? We often say that human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent. These are the principles that guide the international discourse, and they are the promises we make on the global stage. Yet, when you step into the corridors of our local town halls, we often see a strange disconnect. On the one hand, human rights are sometimes perceived as abstract legal concepts or aspirational goals for a distant future that mainly live in treaties or declarations. On the other hand, the local budget is regarded as the only real hard reality, a rigid framework of constraints, costs, and spreadsheets. Now we have lived too long with the impression that human rights and local budgets are separate. In the life of a city, they are a single reality. And let's be honest, to the ordinary person, a budget is a wall of numbers. But those numbers are the tangible foundation of their daily existence. Just imagine a resident in any of our cities. When they wake up, they don't experience the right to health in the abstract. They experience the safety of their morning commute, the quality of the water in their home, or the accessibility of a local health clinic. These are not just service delivery metrics. These are human rights in practice. And every single one of them is determined by the local budget. The outcome document we launched today is our collective response to a simple truth. If a right isn't in the budget, it doesn't exist in the life of people. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, let me walk you through 4 cornerstones of the outcome document. At the heart of this document lies encouragement number 1. The participants of the 5th Academy and Conference on Human Rights at the local and regional levels are calling on local governments worldwide to strategically leverage their budgetary powers across the entire budget cycle, from the first draft to the final audit. Every line item, whether in public transport, housing, or waste management, is not just a number. It is a tool to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. This is the operational core of the outcome document, recognizing that the power of the purse is the most direct instrument a city has to translate human rights obligation into legal and local reality. No city can or should walk this path alone. Encouragements 2, 3, and 4, and 10, therefore, focus on alliances. We encourage peer learning, where cities with practical experience in human rights-based budgeting guide those just beginning the journey. But our ambition goes further. We call for a multi-level framework that connects local authorities with national governments, human rights institutions, academia, civil society, international and regional platforms, international organizations, and of course, city networks. The message is clear. To implement the human rights economy locally, we must share our blueprints as openly as we share our successes. We are not just building budgets, we are building a global community of practice. The third pillar of the outcome document focuses on processes and accountability. A human rights-based budget cannot be decided behind closed doors. Its legitimacy depends on how it is built. First, it must be participatory. We call for a gender-just and age-responsive approach, ensuring that everyone, in particular youth and those most at risk of being left behind, are not just consulted, but are active architects of their own future. It must be transparent. We don't just need available data, we need accessible data. Information presented in a clear format that every citizen can actually understand. It must be equitable. We call for an allocation of resources that ensures that public spending reduces inequalities of outcome and progressively achieves greater equality for all. And it must be conducive to accountability. We must establish oversight and monitoring mechanisms to track if budgetary decisions actually reach the people they are intended to serve. This is how we rebuild the most fragile currency in modern politics: public trust. When constituents see their voices reflected in budget decisions, trust in local governments grows. And finally, we addressed two key foundations with the outcome document: evidence-based policymaking and capacity building. We cannot implement what we do not understand. The outcome document calls for a new interdisciplinary scientific field of human rights-based budgeting, uniting law, economics, and sociology to bridge the gap between theory and practice. We are building the intellectual infrastructure needed to turn human rights into a measurable fiscal reality. And at the same time, we must empower the people behind the desks. We call for the strengthening of institutional capacities so that every public official and leader possesses the human rights literacy needed to make these complex decisions. Our goal is to foster a professional culture where human rights are the default setting of every department, not an optional extra. Ladies and gentlemen, as we face growing inequalities and challenges, the need for a human rights-based budgeting has never been more urgent. Taken together, the encouragement of this 2026 outcome document are a roadmap for the future of a society that truly leaves no one behind. What makes this document innovative is its power to break the silos. It shows that a budget is not just an accounting exercise, it's a moral compass and a tool for accountability. It represents our collective vision of how local authorities can move beyond discussing rights to actually funding them. Because ultimately, signing a treaty is only the beginning. Human rights must be lived, and they must be funded in the streets of our cities. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Mr. Rostel. Thank you for providing that overview of the outcome document. So we'll go back now to our panel, and the next speaker will be Alison Hosey, who's the Scottish Human Rights Commission Research Officer from Edinburgh. And Ms. Hosey, what I'd like to ask you, I mean, we've got a couple of things on the table now. We've got Mayor Kahr, who talked, from a practical perspective about the kind of challenges that she faces as a mayor, and particularly some of the ways in which Graz has implemented human rights with a daycare, with meals for vulnerable people, with housing, and so on. And then we've heard the headlines that the outcome document provided, the sort of top line items that a city could do. So you, in your capacity, I know Scotland, even though it's kind of independent, is really a subnational entity. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the challenges are of implementing local human rights-based budgeting within the national context.
Sure, Martha, thanks very much. I think one of the biggest challenges we've found is, even in a small country like Scotland, is the misalignment between national decisions and government priorities and then local delivery. So the national government has the overall budget that it devolves to local areas. And it says this is the amount of money that each local area is getting, and that's our job done. And yet it's the local governments that have to deliver on people's rights in practice. So local authorities are responsible for delivering those rights, but they often don't control the size, the timing, or the conditions that are attached to the resources that they receive. Certainly in Scotland, local areas have very limited ability to raise funds of their own, so it's very much dependent on what comes from the national government, and that makes it hard to plan and to prioritise and justify decisions in human rights terms when constraints sit elsewhere. I think a second challenge is that the human rights duties are often framed at the national level while the budgeting tools and processes sit locally. So without translating into practical local questions, rights can feel really abstract or legally distant, as Marcus was saying, rather than operationally useful, especially for finance teams who maybe have no capacity or built into their jobs around human rights. So I think there's also a risk of inconsistency. Some local authorities move faster than others. We've had some really good self-starters, really keen to learn, that we're trying to use as pilot local authorities to show others how to do this work. But it can lead to uneven protection of rights depending on where people live. So that we call it the postcode lottery, where access to services or levels of protection can vary simply because of geography. And without clearer national guidance or support and that shared learning, local innovation can be really fragmented rather than systemic. And I think lastly, the austerity style pressures that we're all facing at the moment, they make implementation politically sensitive. So human rights budgeting is sometimes often misunderstood as an additional burden for officials. And we've been seeing a lot recently in Scotland. We've been discussing equality budgeting, participatory budgeting, gender budgeting, and now human rights budgeting. And we've found officials have almost used that as an excuse to say it's just one more thing, too many things, can't do it all. We've coined the phrase cognitive overload, which is what we're seeing officials face. And so a lot of our recent capacity building has been really trying to show how complementary and mutually supportive all of these different approaches are, and that they aren't different. They're fundamentally about placing people at the centre of budgetary decisions that affect their rights and giving them the tools that they can currently kind of navigate that real scarcity that we have in public budgets. But that mindset takes time. That shift takes time, and it takes leadership. So that's the kind of four key things I would say are the major challenges.
Great. Well, wonderful. Thank you. I mean, and it's great to hear from someone who's really working through the process and can speak authoritatively about the kind of potential pitfalls. So let me turn to Secretary General Emilia Saiz, who's the Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments. And we've talked at this conference about, at the Academy, about networks, which of course UCLG is a great network in this area. And I wonder if you could speak about how the messages of the outcome document align with UCLG's priorities and the priorities of the members of UCLG.
Well, thank you very much, Martha, and greetings to the Mayor, Alison, and all the colleagues that are in this academy. I want to start by congratulating the academy for the quality and the depth of the discussions, but also for the boldness of pushing through with these topics at a moment where things are not that obvious, right? It's not that easy to tackle this internationally. So it really touches my heart. I obviously work with mayors, but it was great to listen to the mayor saying, look, I have been in this for 20 years, and this is what convinced me to keep going. And that is the constituency that United Cities and local governments represents, which is a constituency that you have known in particular in the context of the academy through those of us that want to go further, which are the ones that are working under our Committee on Social Inclusion and Human Rights and our Observatory on Participatory Democracy. But UCLG is much larger than that. And so the fight of the the World Organization is to make sure that with that group of the willing, with those that have been doing the job, like Elke and Alison and others, we bring this to the priority of the agenda, to the heart of the agenda of the municipal movement worldwide. And so outcome documents like the one that we are looking at are extremely useful for us in this, and the work that we have been doing with the High Commissioner as well around the guidelines on human rights, the work that we do with UN Habitat and UNESCO obviously are very important tools to make local and regional governments leadership that are not that acquainted with these frameworks to make them realize, look, you are becoming part of international policy making when you do this. And then if you do that, you can also change the interlocution that you have with your national government when discussing budgetary issues. And as Alison was saying, there is not always alignment, right, between ideas and implementation. And also very often our membership is left behind by being seen as mere implementers of things, but local and regional governments are much more than implementers, actually. They need the funding to implement, but they are actually developing the very notion of what it is to have human rights. What do human rights mean for the day-to-day lives of people, for the quality of life? And that is the challenge that my World Organization deals with, right? Putting this at the heart of the agenda. And how do you do that? And from a budgetary perspective, this is a very difficult discussion, because we are asking, we have a great local finance deficit in the world. I mean, the investment in local service delivery is very, very small. And so we are asking for increase. And within that increase, we are also asking to have a different lens to look at the investment. So not only look at what is bankable, not only look at that, what the private sector would be interested in covering, but we are calling our membership, and I think this is critical and is very well described in our charter the charter agenda on human rights, where we are trying to bring all of these ideas together. We are calling our membership to look at themselves as duty bearers, not only as those that have the capacity or those that have the competence, but that have the duty, even if those two other things are not there. The duty to guarantee that people have access to the type of services that they have right to from a human rights perspective, but also the duty to protect the commons that are the basis for those human rights, like access to water, access to energy, access to housing that the mayor was expanding on. So our challenge, and we really like what the outcome document is saying in terms of participation, but our challenge is to align the duty with the competencies, and we cannot miss that discussion. And the other thing that is not always aligned is the relevance of the investment. So, very often we face people saying, look, this is not bankable. So the projects that you are proposing are not bankable. There is money, but you don't present good projects, right? And this is set at national level and also at international level. I see Alison laughing. I know she recognizes this. It's not bankable. And so that is our big discussion. Allow me to tackle two other things before I end. So we need to tackle that discussion, and we need to make sure that we integrate these frameworks, and that this group of the willing in the local and regional government movement push the others to ensure that they cannot shy away from human rights by saying, oh, it's one more framework, the SDG framework, the gender gap framework, all of this is too complex. So putting it at the heart of the agenda is critical. But then it is also critical to encourage ourselves to change the lens a little bit. What is the new generation of local service provision? How do we need to look at local service provision? Where does local service provision need to be in the broader discussion of delivery of not only the local agendas, but also the national and the global agendas. And this is a discussion that we need to change if we want to change the investment. And now going to the responsibilities of the local governments, and because we very much identify with the calls that are being made in the outcome documents, let us admit we also have an issue with participatory mechanisms. Participatory mechanisms are extremely important. We think they are really the backbone of society, but we also need to look at how to improve those mechanisms. And yes, true, we need to restore trust in institutions by using more participatory mechanisms, but we also will need to change broader governance framework to make those participatory mechanisms truly inclusive and truly meaningful in governance. So last comment, full commitment from our World Organization on this. The challenge for us is to identify the new generation of local service provision that needs to have embedded this human rights dimension. And we hope through this academy, but all of the other partners as well that have been working on this, to find the support to resist the backlash that we're having. There is really a very difficult political moment that we're going through also at international level, and we hope that we can keep that group of the willing together. Participatory budgeting, yes, but improving general perceptions of the frameworks that we need for the future, also very relevant. Thank you, Martha.
Great, thank you very much. So that's great to hear the way in which the outcome document can help people connect the dots between the sort of macro and then what's happening at the local level. And then I appreciate your kind of call to action on sort of the energy that's going to be required to address some of these things. So I want to turn to Claudia Luciani, who's the director of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe. And we've heard a lot about the challenges from Alison Jose and from Emilia Saiz now. And I wonder what you think from your perspective are the key next steps to support implementation of the outcome documents, messages by local and regional authorities, particularly given these challenges that we've heard about.
Good afternoon, everybody, and greetings from Strasbourg and from Congress at the Council of Europe. I was delighted with the summing up of the outcome document because it gives me the perfect 4-point small mini presentation of what Congress contribution and Council of Europe, I want to say, can be to the to improving indeed the delivery of human rights at the local level. I think that is the key question for us. Now, with the Council of Europe is concerned, human rights is our bread and butter. The organization is about human rights, is about the protection of human rights. And I want to emphasize this because, of course, human rights can be declaimed, but they actually exist in international law, and they're protected first and foremost in Europe by the Court of Human Rights. And this connection is extremely important as we speak about the role of local governments when it comes to implementing human rights. So on the first point of the outcome document, yes, it is true. It's about having the budget is the visiting card of the authority. And that's where they show what the choices are because they show where they decide to put the resources. So indeed, it is an interesting and important point to measure the enjoyment, the real enjoyment of human rights at the local level that is indeed guaranteed at the international level, I insist, and can be challenged by citizens through courts and ultimately at the Strasbourg Court. And here what I want to say is that we are increasingly seeing that indeed human rights, local governments can be both enabler of enjoyment, but can also be violating human rights. So here there's a question of action in action that is not so clearly shown through human rights-based budgeting, but it must be taken into account because local governments, even outside human rights-based budgeting, can be again enable or fall short of implementing human rights. So what does the Council of Europe do? What does Congress do in this matter? We are making sure that governments that have been condemned for violation of human rights for the responsibilities of local self-government can actually repair those violations. So we're helping a dialogue between states and local governments to make sure they do remain true and implement court judgments that guarantee human rights. These are very powerful message to the citizens because they will see that the local governments really means what they proclaim. Number two, about the alliances, it was called, and the importance of multilateral frameworks, absolutely. Here, I want to underline again that because we work with governments and with local democracies, local governments through the Congress, we pay a lot of attention of what are the bases of that cooperation. In other words, we do go to governments and say, you must make sure that your legal frameworks enable local government to act. Because you can have the best human rights-based budgeting, but if the powers are not guaranteed, the competencies, and therefore the means are not guaranteed to local democracies, this can in fact have a very, very small effect. So we emphasize in our member states the importance of decentralization and making sure they live again up to the Charter of Local Self-Government that defines very clearly the principles on which power needs to be shared. So we go very much into the legal frameworks, into the cooperation, into multi-level governance. We make sure that there is a dialogue between governments. It's a never-ending balance. You know, decentralization is something that is ever pursued and probably never perfectly reached. But we're working very much in our member states on that. And indeed, we agree very much with the outcome document that the emphasis must absolutely be put on this point. Third, accountability and participatory processes. I totally agree with Emilia. We must be careful that these processes are not, sometimes they're misused. They're the perfect speak of a populist saying we're going to involve our citizens, but then they don't. Why? Because it is not clear that the outcome of those processes actually is going to be implemented by local governments. So here again, our work is to, of course, to support those processes across Europe, but to make sure they're clearly following rules and do's and don'ts. So there are rules about how you involve the citizens, how you don't just consult the same ones, you know about all those things. So we must make sure that the participatory processes are indeed truly democratic. And again, the outcome document says it, that there is an oversight, there is a monitoring of the results. Again, not to give this into the hands of easily populist messages. So when it comes to oversight, of course, as you know, Congress has a regular monitoring of member states' compliance with standards, with the Charter of Local Self-Government. We will now explore with colleagues whether we can add human rights-based budgeting to what they look at, what they monitor, because I think, as you have said so eloquently before me, this is a perfect enabler, provider of human rights, and we could probably see if that can be observed also across Europe. Yes, what can we do with the local governments to make sure they do it well? We have training, of course, we have a lot of training sessions that we are introducing. It's very difficult because there are so many local self-governments in 46 member states that we gather. So here, surely cooperation with the UN, with you, we heard the excellent experience of Graz, of Austria. I think the matter here is to cooperate to find the best ways of making sure local governments are aware, are trained, and can actually work on this excellent tool for making sure that our citizens are served when it comes to human rights. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So it's interesting to think about really accountability, creating structures of accountability as being one of the next steps that's going to encourage better realization of human rights at the local level. So I appreciate your talking some about the structural challenges that we might face in implementing this. So I'm going to now turn to Dr. Savitri Bisnath, who is Senior Director, Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School in New York City, and co-editor of this book that I held up earlier, Human Rights, Economies, and Subnational Governance. So Dr. Bisnoff is a scholar who's worked on these issues with the UN and then also more independently and then at the New School. And I wonder, you've done a lot of work at the national level as well as thinking about the local, and we're kind of getting back to challenges now. What do you see as the most difficult challenges of implementing human rights-based budgeting at the local level?
Thank you, Martha, and hello to everyone. It's my honor to participate in this very interesting and relevant panel discussion in this moment. I'll just name a few challenges, some of which will actually reflect what has already been discussed by the panelists so far. The first and major one is the political will and the lack thereof of political will. Politicians, policymakers, and practitioners who are often opposed to different degrees to implementing something new. Politicians and policymakers have to be convinced, including with evidence, but not only with evidence, because after all, we've had evidence over the last decades about the importance of human rights in budgets. That it is the right choice and will in fact keep them in office. And this is where I think from our perspective, it's important to be strategic about the importance of human rights budgeting in terms of keeping political parties and specific politicians in office if they do implement human rights budgeting. For low and middle income countries, it's important for us to note that not only there may be political resistance at the local and national levels to human rights budgeting, but also that the austerity budgets imposed by the international financial institutions often prevent local governments in the global south from implementing human rights budgeting. This challenge demands that we work with the IMF and the World Bank to sensitize them to the importance of human rights budgeting, and that we also work with governments in the South so that they can insist that part of their human rights obligations as duty bearers is to implement human rights budgeting. There's also the issue right now, especially that there is evidence that human rights in general has been weaponized in many countries, especially in the global south, and that oftentimes its advocates have been hypocritical to punish low and middle income countries. And this is something that actually I believe that we must address head on as we work with governments, local governments in particular, in the global south. We need to address this weaponization and reject it. And we show that we have in fact not been hypocritical in our promotion of human rights, because it does lead to greater equality and to sustainable development, and as we bring it to governments in the global south. Now I'll move to the discipline of economics, because as you said, I am an economist, and it's important that the discipline also reflects an appreciation for human rights. So mainstream neoclassical economics and neoliberal economics in particular often do not have the space to bring in human rights processes, standards, and principles into discussions about fiscal policy. In other words, there's a tension between economic development, which is seen as purely led by gross domestic product, the GDP, and economic efficiency, as opposed to allocations for human well-being and dignity, which is what human rights budgeting is often about. Heterodox economics, including feminist economics, is trying to change this. What we need, as Professor Stieglitz has said, is a radical departure with radically different foundations. The economy has to be analyzed as a complex, evolving system where inequality is endemic in the system, and that this inequality affects short and long-term performance, including performance in economic growth. its drivers and the policies that curb it ought to be under the spotlight. And this is what I think advocates for human rights budgeting have been trying to do over the last years. Markets do not work in a vacuum. And this is also important when we think of human rights budgeting, because it's not only about the allocation side, it's also about the revenue generation side. Where will the revenue come from? And that's where markets are an important consideration, especially in terms of its generation of revenue. The functioning of a market economy depends on the laws, rules, norms, and institutional structures under which it operates, all determined by power relations, and the outcome that it produces affects the distribution of power itself. And that's also where we may find some resistance, but also where disciplines like feminist economics has a role to play, and I'll go into that in more detail later. Finally, I want to make a point about what makes human rights budgeting truly human rights, right? And how do we get there? And one which many of the panelists have already talked about is the need for economic literacy. So if as the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights notes, that we must recognize that in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that free human beings must enjoy freedom of fear and freedom of want, then we need to, in the budget, in the local budget, to create the conditions where everyone is able to enjoy their economic, social, cultural rights, as well as their civil and political rights. And many people have spoken about the right to education, the right to housing, etc., all of which are important for the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. But we also need to highlight to policymakers and to the people in the budget office that human rights budgeting will also deliver on the political and civil rights side. No two budgets are the same, and in addition, duty bearers and rights holders are differently engaged and impacted by local budgets in terms of planning, implementation, and monitoring. And there we need to be strategic with the different actors and in the ways in which they interact with the budget on how we advocate on the planning side, on the implementation side, and on the monitoring side, and how we bring different stakeholders, including communities, in these different processes. Specific human rights principles and participation has been talked about, non-discrimination, transparency, and accountability, as well as obligations, are relevant for us to break down at a very practical level. And this is where the literacy comes in, because it's important for us to not only think of economic literacy for some members who will participate in the budget process, but also human rights literacy especially for politicians and policymakers. A human rights economy, as we've been saying in the book, and in my work, is one that centers people, the places where they live, the planet, and all the human rights in budget policies, plans, programs, processes, and decision making. And these different areas in which we must think about the budget is very important. And that's where the issue of disaggregated data comes in. And that is also a challenge and often a constraint, because while we may have data on growth, perhaps even also at the local level, we may not have disaggregated data, for example, on issues relating to gender. Where are women within the workplace? Where are men within the workplace? How do their consumer habits generate revenue? How do the current property taxes and other taxes that may affect high net worth individuals and the private sector come into play? This type of disaggregated data is also important from the perspective of the revenue generation side. A human rights budget recognizes the indivisibility of human rights, and Marcus mentioned this in his outcome document. But what does it mean, this indivisibility of human rights? How do we break this down to policymakers who are engaged in the budget process so they see that there is a value add when we bring in, as our colleague from Edinburgh talked about, the different types of budgeting that is on the table. We need to be intentional about this. Also, in terms of the principles of maximum available resources and progressive taxation, we can show local policymakers the ways in which the human rights principles are actually some things that they are already including in their budget, but not necessarily speaking about it in those terms. Finally, I think it's important for us to acknowledge together on this panel, but also in the work that we're doing, and to try to incorporate the ways in which the budget is an important tool to repair and redress root causes and structural barriers to the enjoyment of human rights. And I think when we do that through budget numbers, through allocations to different sectors, housing, water, food, we are best able to deliver human rights for communities and to ensure that budgets remain compliant to human rights. So with that, I'll end and hand over to you, Martha.
Great, thank you, Savi. So that's very helpful. I think that starts to give us some of the elements of what would be contained in the trainings that Ms. Luciani was talking about, among others. So thank you very much for that. So now let me turn to Daphne Feinholz, who is the Director of Research, Ethics, and Inclusion at UNESCO. And welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what, and we've got a lot on the table now, what kind of steps might UNESCO and other international regional bodies take to support local governments in implementing the elements of the outcome document?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not, I was just trying to make sure I'm not muted. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I also want to thank the International Center for Promotion of Human Rights at the local and regional level for this invitation. We are really proud, as already Lydia Brito said, of having partners such as the Graz International Center as Category 2 institute within UNESCO's family to promote this sustainable local development. And also congratulations on the organization on this 5th edition of the Academy, the Conference on Human Rights on the local and regional levels. I also want to really greet my co-panelists. It has been really a pleasure to listen to all of you. I think we have many things that we share. No, we all are so much worried about the accountability. I mean, I really liked this approach of the duty bearers at the local level, not only as implementers. The complementarity about the different approaches, I really like that, because it's true. It's like when you speak about gender, they think it's only, oh, I have to include this as if it was different from human rights or from disabilities or from, and these complementary approaches that you mentioned, it was so important. The true engagement and what the meaningful engagement and the transparent engagement of community, I think of the participants also so important. And of course, accountability and sharing experiences, just to mention a few, but I have really enjoyed all your input so far. So I think that this year's outcome document is really making a very compelling case for action. So local governments are not only, as many of you have said, implementers of human rights, but they're indispensable actors in translating these human rights in commitments into lived realities, which I guess in a way puts them as a duty bearers. So the question, therefore, is not whether international and regional bodies should support them, but how this support can be made meaningful, coherent, and sustained. So for UNESCO's perspective, there is a first critical step, I would say, that lies in facilitating structure spaces for peer learning and translocal cooperation, because it has also been mentioned the importance of this conversation and sharing experiences. So one of the strongest messages of the outcome document is that innovation at the local level often emerges through exchanges with peers facing similar constraints. And UNESCO's International Coalition of Inclusive and Sustainable Cities, which consists of over 700 cities around the world, and the UNESCO Global Alliance Against Racism and Discrimination, it offers a ready-made multi-stakeholder platform where cities can share concrete budgeting practices, learn from both successes and failures. Of course, it depends on the context, but I think there is a lot of things that they can be shared and learned, and collectively refined methodologies, each of them. When combined with regional bodies such as the Council of Europe or city networks like UCLG, these platforms can ensure that learning is continuous, regionally grounded, and politically relevant. And I also like this last idea of showing that it's not only good to proceed like this in investing and budgeting, which, as many of the speakers have said, is really showing where the priorities are, but not only vis-a-vis the population, but also for political power to stay. And at the end of the day, is they will be working for the interest of the people. So I would only try to not to instrumentalize this as a political thing for them to say, okay, I will use you to stay, but it's true that they will stay if they protect people. So a second closely related step is capacity development grounded in practice. The outcome document clearly recognizes that there is no single model for human rights-based budgeting and that the local realities must guide implementation. So UNESCO is well positioned to respond to this need through applied learning formats that move beyond abstract guidance. For example, we have existing tools such as the Anti-Racism Toolkit, and we have partners that can support local officials, finance departments, and elected representatives with hands-on training that link human rights principles directly to budget cycles, to expenditure choices, and impact assessment. Importantly, this type of support must be interdisciplinary, bringing together human rights expertise, but also public finance, urban policies, and social data. A third step concerns evidence. It concerns data and narrative change, as it has already been mentioned also by previous speakers. Human rights-based budgeting requires local governments to demonstrate how financial decision affects rights holders, particularly those most at risk of being left behind. And this has, I think I'm just echoing what has been said before. And international organizations such as UNESCO can support the development of qualitative tools and storytelling approaches that make human rights impacts visible and communicable. We have some experience on this, and we have seen that this is another way of getting also the message passed clearly and more digestible. It's not about monitoring. It's not only about monitoring and accountability. It is also about strengthening, as also was said before, public trust and helping local leaders explain why relocating resources in line with human rights principle is both legitimate and necessary. I think this communication with people is so important because people can agree or disagree with some policies, but the transparency and the reasoning behind the decisions is also so much important. And when this is also a good practice in when we apply bioethics in public policies, when you have to explain the reasons for why you are, for example, providing more money for some disease and not the other. So people might not agree, but when they see that this is not arbitrary, that there is, at the end of the day, also good for the whole society, for the society as a whole, that also is always very important to know that there is some rationale behind, that you can understand, disagree or not, but understand. And I think that's also a very good exercise. So finally, I would say that international and regional bodies can support implementation by aligning advocacy, funding, and partnership. And UNESCO can help amplifying this signal by advocating for the recognition of human rights-based budgeting with funding frameworks, urban development programs, and international cooperation instruments. In doing so, the support for local governments moved from isolated projects to a more systemic and enabling environment. So taken together, promoting knowledge exchange and peer learning, practical capacity building, evidence generation, and aligned partnerships will reinforce local autonomy while strengthening accountability. So this is precisely where I think UNESCO's added value lies, because it can connect global principles with local actions and ensuring that human rights-based budgeting becomes a durable component of inclusive and sustainable local governments. And I will stop here for the moment.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. So it's wonderful to hear about all the resources that are available from some of these international bodies to assist and support local governments that are embarking on this. And especially I'm interested in your idea about storytelling as a way to address this. So we have time to go back around and hear from our panelists again on kind of about elaborating on some of these things that we've got out on the table now. So I'm going to turn back to Mayor Kahr and ask you what I'm sorry, my dog is here making noises because it's the morning time here. So what impacts would you anticipate from human rights budgeting in Graz? You already talked a little bit about some of the areas where Graz has really implemented those kinds of things. If talking about human rights budgeting as the allocating available funds to satisfy people's needs, I wonder if you could talk about what the impacts you would expect, and thinking not only about what the impacts would be for the people of Graz directly, but also I'm curious about how Graz might benefit from being part of a transnational network that is doing this kind of work. What kinds of sort of benefits you might get from being part of this larger coalition. Let me turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for your dog barking. I noticed that we only have women present here on the panel today, which is remarkable and interesting to me. I would like to emphasize once again how many important aspects have been mentioned by the speakers today. I want to emphasize this once again. I am deeply convinced as mayor, but also as human being, that our humanity as a whole, our societies as a whole can benefit from this, but it will be difficult to bring about these changes. Graz has been a human rights city for 25 years. We have always used data to support our decisions. We have heard several times today how important the collection and the use of data is. No matter if we're talking about gender-related questions or other questions in the social realm, in all those areas, it is crucial to collect valid data. And I can say this from experience. No matter what my specific role was, I focused on what people really need, because I'm not caught in this office 24 hours a day. I talk to our citizens. And this is not common, but that is the best data you can really gather. Taking a look at how people live, how they work, where they work, under which conditions they work, no matter where they're from. And this is something that I'm really proud of. I'm proud that as mayor, I see this unfolding. And we are a social, ecological city, and we want to implement these new approaches. And our colleague Alison already mentioned an important point. Citizens don't adopt laws, which means that we now have very progressive local government where we do take political decisions, but at the same time, we meet with other political levels and representatives at other political levels that do adopt laws at a very rapid pace. And those laws are not aligned with what we decide at a local level. And this is a problem because violations of these laws have an impact on cities. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is the political power balance in a specific country? And what is the power balance like at a local level? These neoliberal political practices often are carried out at a disadvantage of humans. We need to ensure an equitable power balance, because if we do so, then humans can improve in all areas of life, because everything that is adopted has a reason, of course, but local governments or regional governments and national governments don't have a look at people's everyday lives. But we do that. In Graz, for example, we see a lot of voluntary services that we're not obligated to provide, but we do so, and we invest mass sums of money to focus on where people need support when it comes to energy supply, for example, or in parks, do we need more green spaces? Do our schools need support? And also in the care sector, in the health sector. At the same time, though, our national government says proudly that they were able to bring about the strongest social rights that ever existed. And this exerts pressure on people, especially women with children. And that is why we see child poverty increasing, because our social policies are not funded correctly at a local level, and this generates huge problems. We cannot ensure anymore that children are able to partake in school activities because they just don't have the necessary financial means. We don't want to leave anyone behind at a local level. We want to use our funds to compensate what is not provided at a national level. And we can see these gaps in many different areas. For example, social public transport. We want to fund public transport, but if we don't receive the resources from the national government, we're unable to do so. Austria is a very privileged country, but if we look at this topic in a European context, if you look at Bosnia, Serbia, they are not in this privileged position. They have to deal with greater problems even. There's a huge difference in local government resources if you look at different European countries. And sometimes decisions lead to a dysregulated situation. Not too long ago, in Austria, we were told that we have too much social housing, meaning social housing should only be provided to the poorest. But that is the wrong approach, because that way we can't ensure that our society is not separated in different categories. But I wanted to emphasize once again that we have to continue focusing on each individual human being. But at a local level, we cannot do so if the national government is acting in a way that is not supporting what our people need, because they don't take into consideration the needs of people at a local level. And we have to be aware of this. At the same time, however, I am optimistic, because, as we've already heard, we do see that people are fighting to change this. We see young people who are advocating for this. We see the working class advocating for this. And that is the greatest treasure we have, because that is the way that is going to allow us to implement human rights. And that is why democratic laws are also so important. We've already heard about that today as well. The most important democratic right, and I can only say that from an Austrian perspective, would be the participation in political decision procedures, meaning the right to vote. But we're excluding people here in Austria from the right to vote. People who have been living in Austria for decades, who pay taxes, they're not allowed to partake in these elections still. But that is of utmost importance to ensure the implementation of human rights. This year, we do have elections here, and so we are putting a strong focus on this problem. And also expenditures in defense are important, because we are using the money that people work for, that they generate through their jobs, and we use it to invest in defense. We're using all this money that would be so important, that we should invest in health, in education, and also on the global level. We have to say that we are in a very privileged position. There are other countries in a more precarious situation. I am very proud that we have institutions such as UNESCO and all your organizations, the Human Rights Council, for example. However, we do see a shift in political power balances right now, because some political levels don't see human rights obligations as something that is important. We see Putin, Trump. I'm sorry that I have to mention these two in this context, but their decisions also have an impact on people's everyday lives, because people are concerned. They're worried about what's going on. They're not just worried about their life here in this country. They're worried about our world being thrown out of joint, because these red lines have been crossed a long time ago already. And that is why it is so important that we stay interconnected. And we put a strong focus on this here in Graz as well. No matter who we're talking about, all people are interconnected in this city. And we also stay in contact with mayors in different cities. I, as a mayor, for example, invite different political representatives. So this is important, because that is how we learn, and that is how we learn to become more resilient. And that is how we appreciate the political work being done outside of national government decisions. So I want to say thank you once again for your great work.
So, thank you very much, Mayor Kahr. And it's interesting for me as somebody who's here in the U.S. to hear about some of the common challenges that folks around the world are facing right now in terms of the.
In 2 weeks, by the way, students and young adults from the Bronx, from New York, will come to Graz to visit us, and I'm very much looking forward to that.
Excellent. Excellent. I mean, that's so important right now to have that kind of international exchange. So thank you very much. So we have another 20 minutes, but we have a lot of people to speak. So we'll try to make sure that everyone gets the time that they need, but we also need to finish by around 8. So let me turn then to Alison Hosey, who we heard from earlier, and Mayor Kahr mentioned data, which I know is really a focus of you as a research officer. And I wondered what kinds of capacities does a local government need to succeed in implementing human rights budget? Maybe you could specifically talk a little bit about kinds of data, but then please feel free to put other things on the table too.
Sure. I mean, data, it's featured a lot in the conference and the Academy this week. The data is absolutely crucial to being able to make the right decisions. And Without that, we are hamstrung in terms of knowing what we need, what's going on, who's most affected by decisions. And it's something we've been working with the Scottish Government and trying to develop better use of data. But it's also the timing of when that data is used. So we have a document that's been called the Equality and Fairer Scotland Budget Statement, and it accompanies our budget annually. And it's changed to something that I can't remember the name of now, but it's hopefully becoming more useful. But in the past, it was essentially using the data available to assess the equality impacts, and we've been trying to encourage human rights as part of that, of budgetary decisions. But it accompanies the budget after the decisions are made. And so it's kind of like, this is what we think the impacts will be, here you are, as opposed to it being something that goes, this is what the impacts we think will be, and how do we let that inform our actual budgetary decisions? And I think that's where we're trying to make that shift in terms of how we use data, is that it's presented at a time that is useful for people to participate on budgetary decisions instead of after the fact. And we tend to look at it at that kind of post hoc stage instead of looking at beforehand what impacts might it have and then afterwards. So I think that's really key. But I think also in terms of capacities at that local level, we've talked a lot as well about champions and champions within organisations, and I think that's also really key. We've started doing a lot of capacity building work and trying to spark those light bulbs in organisations, and we have found that individual people, quite often individual officers, they get it, and they need our support and other supports within their organisations to get higher ups to acknowledge that this is something that's worth trying. And when we get that support, we also need those champions to find each other. And so to be able to develop that kind of shared learning, the peer kind of capacity building, to build their confidence collectively. So peer networks, I think locally and then nationally, bringing those networks together are really, really important to help convince colleagues and senior leaders that this is doable and it's worthwhile. I think that the practical translation of human rights into budget language is also really important. So staff need the tools to connect rights to the familiar processes that they already do in budget setting and impact evaluation and service planning. And so helping frame human rights as operational questions rather than just kind of legal abstracts is really important. So helping people understand what the minimum core obligations are, what does that mean in terms of their obligations, impact questions, non-retrogression tests that they can apply to alongside the kind of existing impact assessments on budgets. And I think, Sabi mentioned earlier about senior leadership support, and I think staff internally, they need permission to ask difficult questions about priorities, about trade-offs, and about impacts. And I think that leadership backing, even without it, even the most enthusiastic officers will struggle to embed that change. And I think, although we're looking at the local level, I think there is something we found useful in terms of national leaders. So we have the Auditor General, who's responsible for auditing all local authorities across Scotland. And we've been working on trying to influence him and his team, because they ask the questions in national and local audits. They ask local authorities what they're doing. So we've been getting the question in, what are they doing about human rights? And that's really key, because if they're asking the question, it's seen as important. So I think looking at what national levers you can use at that local level is also really important. And then just lastly, we're doing some pilot work with the local authority whose light bulb that we sparked off. And I think pilots are really important, testing things out, being able to learn and adapt processes and then share that learning.
Also man versteht jetzt mehr, was die tun.
But that was my last point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that's super helpful, and I appreciate thinking about the issue of champions and the way in which like the dynamics of the city itself can be organized or orchestrated in such a way that it really promotes this kind of integration of human rights. So let me turn back to Secretary General Saiz, and I want to ask you about the Human Rights Cities movement, because I know that UCLG is very active in promoting human rights cities, and I wonder how you think the outcome documents elements can be integrated through the Human Rights Cities movement, and maybe particularly thinking about the recent guidance framework that the ECLG co-developed with the Office of the High Commission.
Well, thank you very much, Martha. I think that is pretty easy in the work that we are doing also around our charter agenda on human rights. I see there is a lot of alignment and coincidence between the outcome document and what we are proposing. My challenge is a little bit of a different one. When I was trying to make the difference between that group of leaders that are championing and I very much agree with what has been said about champions, that are championing human rights. We have this campaign, 100,000 human rights cities. I really think it is a moment for everyone to join, and I would encourage Mayor Kahr to look into that as well. I'm saying it's the time for people to join and show their colors, because we represent also those that do not identify so much with human rights. The wonder, what I'm very proud about, is that we are able to make this a priority of the organization as a whole, even if you have people that are actually living in contexts where human rights are being weaponized. And not only human rights, the whole SDG framework is being weaponized, right? So knowing that we are in this kind of context, I think it is good for us to work in outcome documents like the one that we have produced and ask those that are already committed to go deeper and to look at the whole financial aspect. But I also think we need to do to be strategic in the global discussion, and from where I am standing, I think it will be really important for those of us that are trying to put human rights at the heart of local decision making to connect this with the discussion on the post 2030 SDG framework. I mean, right now, most of the countries are considering the idea of not having a framework at all. And we could sit back and say, yeah, but then the Universal Declaration on Human Rights is still valid, so we will go through that. I think that will pose a real challenge for all of us that are trying to actually make a difference in local service delivery with a human rights lens. So I think this is an aspect that we really need to look at, that we need to make sure that those of us working on human rights also call it for the SDG framework to continue somehow and to help deepen some of the issues that we know are not connected enough within the SDG framework to actually make it happen. Another thought that I have and that finds itself perfectly aligned with the outcome document, that from my perspective is not channeled enough, is that we cannot put people first right now if we don't put nature first as well. People and nature, they need to go together. The rights of nature will need to be part of future service delivery and future legal frameworks. And we don't do this soon enough, we will find ourselves without tools to actually address some of the challenges that we have. It will not be it will not be possible for many mayors around the world to defend local common goods if they are not working with other mayors and territories around them to protect the commons coming from nature. So water cycles, etc. And that is something that our movement needs to put there first, and that I see the outcome documents from a budgeting perspective can really help us with that. And this is intertwined with putting care as a lens, a perspective to give shape to new types of services. And allow me to finish with something that Sabriti said on the financial frameworks that we are dealing with, where there is actually no real lens for human rights, and we will need together to discuss this and beyond, going for commitments at the local and regional level, which are critical. And again, the group of local and regional governments that are truly committed to human rights is not that big. We want to see it growing. But if we want to seriously address some of the challenges of the human rights agenda, we need to address the financing gap that we have in local service delivery. There is no way around this. So I leave you with that. But I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it gives me, a lot of pleasure to see that there are many people on the right side of history and fighting the good fight. So thank you very much, Marta, for giving me the opportunity again.
Oh, well, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I appreciate your raising the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly thinking about how local governments have really stepped up in many ways in thinking about how those affect them locally through a human rights lens, often, not always, but often. So let me turn then to Claudio Luciani again and ask you another question. You mentioned earlier when you spoke about the kinds of trainings that the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities might engage in. I wonder if you could dig in a little bit more to that. What kind of technical support could the Congress provide to, now with the some of the issues that we've got on the table here, what kind of technical support might the Congress provide?
Yes, thank you. I will make 2 points. One is to respond to your question, what is it that we can offer concretely? So we do have training materials that we are elaborating. And again, the challenge there is the magnitude, the numbers, the sheer numbers of potential users of that training, but we're working on that also with other partners. But we have in a number of countries, Ukraine, Moldova, but also Western countries, we work on participatory budgetary processes. We see that they are very well received. We also involve young people in countries where democracy is not very strong, if I can say that way. We use also civil society if we cannot use mayors because they're elected on non-fair elections. So we have also that challenge. So we try to make sure that the citizens understand what this means, and therefore involve beyond the local elected representatives, also other actors. We also have developed guidelines and practical toolkits on transparency in local governance. And we offer materials that cover typically steps for publishing budget data in accessible formats so that there can be used. Communication strategies, we went over this before about how you present this. For explaining what we've just been saying, the impact of budgets on human rights. And also, thirdly, these guidelines have checklists for ensuring compliance with the principles of openness and accountability. These are principles that we call them the good governance principles, the open government principles. So they must, these guidelines must really show how this is based on. I also wanted to come back to something that the mayor of Graz just said before about the political, and others too, the political difficulties that we may experience, notably in this particular moment, where we indeed have shrinking human rights spaces and authorities that are openly non-committed to human rights. So this is indeed a very new challenge. Now, the only thing that we are very careful about at the Council of Europe is we cannot assume that the local governments are more progressive than the national. On the contrary, in the neighboring country to ours, France, there are developments that would tell you exactly the opposite, and they're not that encouraging. So we really, that's why I cannot overemphasize the importance of human rights internationally guaranteed, because we cannot necessarily rely on any level can go astray when it comes to human rights. So we must absolutely make sure that the commitment to implementing human rights remains internationally guaranteed. And looking for champions in this, we spoke about champions. If we look for champions in this respect, I just want to really commend, we have really commended the action, I'm sure you followed, of the mayor of Budapest, who, in order to defend the human rights and the rights of citizens to freely demonstrate in the Pride Parade in March, he actually went against the national law because he was so committed to making sure the citizens of the city could march freely. And as you probably know, recently he has been charged with, of course, not complying with national law. But here you have internationally, he has been supported. He's certainly supported also by his fellow citizens. So if we're looking for champions in defending human rights, what he did, I think, did a lot more than many other declarations, because he really meant, he really walked the talk and really stood for human rights. So I just want to mention that champions for us are people like the mayor of Budapest.
Thank you so much for those insights, especially coming from the U.S. I'm certainly very aware of what's going on in terms of pulling back from human rights. So it's so interesting to hear other perspectives and to hear about the champions that we have as well. Let me turn then to Savi Bisnath. You said earlier that you were going to give us some perspective on how human rights-based budgeting can benefit from a feminist perspective. So I'm going to turn it over to you to add that piece.
Thank you very much, Martha. And I do want to appreciate my fellow panelists. It's been so heartwarming and interesting to listen to what everyone has to say. So I'm a feminist economist, and I was pleased with this question when it was posed earlier this week. So what does feminist economics offer human rights budgeting? First of all, it's important to invoke a phrase which was actually coined by Charlotte Bunch but popularized by Hillary Clinton, which is that women's rights are human rights. So we're not really talking about two different things. What we're talking about really is being much more comprehensive, complete about our analysis. Feminist economics offers a more complete way of thinking about economics and the budget as a tool to get us to the realization of human rights for all. It critiques mainstream neoclassical and neoliberal economics and centers issues related to care, work, and power relations as central to understanding economic processes and outcomes. And here I want to say that feminist economists have been unapologetic at bringing in power relations analysis at the household level, as Amartya Sen has done, at the national level and at the global level. Human rights budgeting benefits from a feminist perspective because it questions and its questions and analyses center gendered power relations and processes from an intersectional point of view. It has the potential to transform the budget process and outcomes, resulting in substantive equality and systemic change. A feminist perspective in the budget process will center all people from context-specific and an intersectional point of view, recognize the indivisibility of human rights, highlight economic, social, and cultural rights as essential for the realization of human dignity and inclusive sustainable development. And here I emphasize economic, social, cultural rights because we know historically it has been marginalized in human rights discourse, enhance the respect for and protection and fulfillment of all human rights, facilitate space for social dialogue, scrutiny, and participation among all stakeholders, and promote transparency and accountability in the budget process. Now, how do we get from what I've just said to a much more practical implementation of feminist analysis, feminist economic analysis in the budget process? Well, context specificity, because not all local contexts are the same, evidence-based not only in terms of revenue generation and allocation, but gender disaggregated data. Where are women, men, boys and girls, and others in the market, in the local government, in the communities? Where are they living in terms of geographic location, etc.? And how are they experiencing multiple and persistent forms of discrimination and marginalization? Excuse me. Based on different categories. It's now 7 a.m. for me, so the phone is quite active. Sorry about these noises. How do we look at different categories of communities based on race, on income, on gender identity, on location, etc.? And the mayor mentioned that kids from the Bronx will be coming to Austria. And I think it's really important what has happened in New York City during the last mayoral campaign. We saw a mayor-elect who was actually campaigning in different communities, recognizing the diversity in those communities and the challenges that they face. And now he's speaking publicly about the budget process. He's bringing communities along with the budget process, and we have yet to see the extent to which there will be substantive engagement with the budget process, but it is quite hopeful. For example, feminist economists will ask, who has the power to make decisions about the budget? Who are the winners and losers in the budget outcomes? How are different groups affected by budget priorities? And who benefits from tax policies? For feminist economists, the revenue side is as important as the expenditure side of the budget. It also calls for the identification of root causes and structural barriers for equality. So here we are also going for system change, but we know that this takes a long period of time. Economic decisions that center human rights will economic decisions that center human rights recognizes that assessments of the health and well-being of societies necessarily entails the use of economic data that go beyond the GDP. So we bring in, what does the education level look like in a particular community? What does the health data look like, etc.? It recognizes that human rights principles and obligations provide ring fencing for public budgets. And this is very important when we talk of austerity budgets, and promote participation and fiscal transparency and accountability to better facilitate redistribution and trust, but also to reduce